January 12th, 2005 is a cold, damp afternoon in rural East Cork. Volunteers and Gardaí pushed through gorse and brambles near a remote seaside glen called Inch Strand. They are 8 days into the search for a missing 11-year-old boy named Robert Holohan. A shout shatters the silence. In a ditch, amongst dense undergrowth, one of the searchers has spotted a small foot. There, wrapped in black plastic bin bags, lies the body of a child. Dental records will later be needed to confirm the worst. It is the body of little Robert Holohan. The search that has stopped the nation, the boy everyone has been praying to find alive, is dead. A silence falls over the search party. Some stare in disbelief. Others, overcome by grief, break down, their cries carried by the winter wind. Gardaí secure the scene as dusk sets in. Under the burst of torchlights, zigging and zagging, Gardaí note disturbing details. Parts of Robert's clothing appear charred and burnt sticks lie near his body. It's immediately clear this is no accident. Robert Holohan has been killed. The missing child search has become a murder investigation. In this small, tight-knit community, a terrifying question emerges. Who could have done this? When someone is killed in Ireland, the Gardaí call in a team of forensic scenes of crime examiners from the Technical Bureau. For 25 years, I was part of that team. My name is John Sweetman. In my work as a detective in the Garda Technical Bureau, I was there to read the silent and often hidden clues at a crime scene. I saw what killers tried to hide. Fingerprints unknowingly left behind, murder weapons hidden in plain sight, handwriting that betrayed a lie. Every detail told the real story, and now I'll tell you those stories. In this podcast from GoLoud, I take you inside some of Ireland's most haunting crimes. This is Lines of Inquiry, a GoLoud original podcast that looks beyond the headlines, following the evidence step by step, and uncovering the stories behind the investigations. In this episode, the killing of Robert Holohan, a community's worst nightmare, a frantic search that gripped the nation, and a devastating secret that lay close to home. Robert Holohan was born in Ballyedmond in 1994, a peaceful rural townland on the outskirts of Midleton in County Cork. Ballyedmond is a patchwork of small farms, laneways and scattered houses. In 2005, it was the kind of place where children wandered around freely, cycling the back roads and calling in and out of neighbours' houses. It was a community where everyone knew one another. Robert was the eldest child of Mark and Magella Holohan. He was big brother to 9-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Harry. Robert was real Cork, an outgoing, chatty, energetic young boy who loved Gaelic football and hurling. Cork hurling star Sean O'Halpine was his idol. He loved nature and animals, in particular horses, and as a country boy, he was fond of adventure, cycling along the narrow country roads and laneways on his silver BMX bike, playing with friends. His mother Magella would later recall that Robert was full of the joys of life, a happy child who thought the world of everyone around him. He loved to go fly fishing with his dad, Mark. He doted on the family's pets, his Labrador Taz and his pony Stella, and spent as much time as he could outdoors in the quiet countryside he called home. He loved the outdoor life, and before he owned his own pony, Robert mucked out at local stables and took riding lessons. When Magella was ill, Robert would make her scrambled eggs and tea. He put in too much salt, but she ate it anyway. That Christmas, Robert was over to Moon to get a new silver BMX bicycle from Santi. Now, in the final days of his school Christmas holiday, he cycled it every chance he got. Tuesday, January 4th, 2005, was a damp day with a chill in the air, and the sky above Cork was a winter grey. Robert and Magella went out for lunch. a mother and her son, Robert speaking proudly about the medal he got for hurling and had been presented with the night before at the local GAA club. Robert was still a child with his shiny new bike. He was also moving towards his teenage years with his other Christmas present, his first mobile phone. But he was still that same child he had always been to his mother, still playing games, still enjoying spending time with his parents, still afraid of the dark. The mother and son returned home after lunch, and Majella watched as Robert took the bike over jumps and ramps in the garden. That afternoon, Robert set off on his bike, draining the last drop out of the school Christmas holidays. Around 2:30 p.m, Majella watched him cycle his bike out of the driveway, heading off to play. He called out that he might see a friend down the road, and his mother reminded him not to be long. The dark came early in the day. There's no grand stretch in early January, not in East Cork. Robert was dressed in a warm jacket and tracksuit bottoms, normal garb for a boy out on his bike. There was nothing to distinguish this moment from countless other carefree afternoons of Robert's childhood. It would be the last time Majella ever saw her son alive. Majella called Robert's phone at 3:30, asked what he wanted for dinner, but got no answer. She called again 15 minutes later, and still no answer. She presumed he would be home soon before the winter night set in. She felt no fear about her child's safety in that quiet rural area. But when he hadn't returned home by 5 o'clock, as the day faded into night, her concern quickly turned to panic. This was out of character for Robert. It wasn't like him to be late home. Robert was afraid of the dark. He was never out after night had set in. The Holohans phoned around, checking in with neighbours and friends, hoping someone had seen Robert since earlier that day. One of the first calls Majella made was to their close neighbours, the O'Donoghue house. Around 5:30 p.m, she reached the eldest son, Wayne, by phone. Wayne was one of the people Robert visited regularly. They would play PlayStation and hurling together, and despite the age gap, were close friends. Majella thought Robert looked up to Wayne as if he were an older brother. Once, when Wayne had needed money for a new car, Robert had offered to help him out with money from his small savings. Majella asked if Robert had been by the house that afternoon. Wayne said he'd seen Robert about 2:30, but not since then. He offered to help, and soon he, his brother and father joined the growing number of neighbours gathering at the Holohan home to begin the search. By that night, word of the missing boy had spread, and dozens of local people volunteered to sweep the fields, ditches and outbuildings around Ballydedmond with torches. Gardaí were called and quickly launched an official missing person operation. Inside the Holohan home, neighbours tried to comfort Mark and Majella as they waited, growing ever more anxious with each passing minute, desperate for any sign of their son, their little boy, out there in the black night and afraid of the dark. Wayne O'Donoghue, their neighbour who Robert had idolised, stood beside Majella in her kitchen that evening, assuring her that Robert was bound to turn up. "Don't worry, you'll find him all right," he said gently as he pulled out his mobile phone from his pocket. "I'll try him on my mobile." Majella watched as Wayne dialed Robert's number and put the phone to his ear. But no answer came. Wayne snapped his flip phone shut. There was nothing. Majella called Robert herself. She left messages, asking him to phone her back. Outside the search continued, the dark roads, farms and ditches lit by car headlights and handheld torches. Gardaí, friends of the Holohans, and complete strangers trudged through muddy fields and hedgerows, calling Robert's name. Late on that first night there was a significant discovery. Neighbours found Robert's bike lying some 500 yards from the Holohan home. At first they were confused by the seemingly brand new bike being left out in the open, but when they heard of the missing child, they quickly reported it to Gardaí. When Gardaí reported the find to the family, Majella asked Wayne to identify it. He confirmed it was Robert's. The bicycle looked intact, not crashed or damaged. The focus of the search shifted from the roads and paths to the surrounding countryside, as volunteers feared the boy might be injured, or worse, lying out there in the cold night. Robert's parents sat up all that first night, with the local Gardaí, praying for good news. Majella was plagued by horrific thoughts of where her son was, where he was being kept, what terrible things might have been done to him. Over the next few days, Mark Holohan stayed home each day in case Robert returned. Majella kept calling his phone, and the search operation grew into an unprecedented community effort and a story that gripped Ireland. Across the whole country, the worry was felt by those with no connection to the Holohan family and no knowledge of Ballydedmond, a small boy missing in the dark winter, a nightmare we can all at least try to understand. A story so tragic and haunting, it gripped an entire nation. Every morning, newspaper front pages and radios in kitchens, cars and offices across the country gave what little updates there may be. And for all that noise, silence. Agonising silence from Mark, Majella, Emma and Harry, and so many others. In life, most things change slowly. So gradually you don't notice the change until long after it has passed. But sometimes you can see change happening before your eyes. You can bear witness to your world altering in just days or hours, or even minutes. For the people of Ballydedmond, and for the Holohan family, you can imagine this day as one of those moments. As those people, friends, families, the young and the old, spread out across those country lanes and fields, that quiet place was changed forever, in a moment that would become a permanent part of its story. The disappearance of Robert Holohan triggered one of the largest missing persons searches in the history of the state, according to RTE News. By the weekend, up to 1,200 volunteers from Cork and beyond had joined Gardaí, the Civil Defence, the Coast Guard, and even members of Ugly Naharan, the Irish Army, in combing the East Cork countryside for any trace of 11-year-old Robert. A no-fly zone was put in place over areas of East Cork. What was unfolding was unlike anything this place had ever known. They scoured forests, fields, riversides, and farm buildings in an expanding radius. Gardaí set up a search headquarters at East Cork Golf Club, coordinating teams grid by grid across terrain that was sometimes thick with briars and overgrowth, and saturated after a wet start to the winter. Community halls were filled with locals, making sandwiches and tea for the weary searchers. In searches like this, hope of a positive outcome fades in tandem with the longer it goes on. Information phone lines were set up and were lit up with calls from the public. Some witnesses came forward with potential leads. Gardaí received a tip-off about a well-dressed man who was seen twice walking in Egan's Field near Water Rock Golf Course, close to the spot where Robert went missing. Early in the investigation, they also wanted to trace the drivers of a number of vehicles, including 3 white transit vans, one of which had a red stripe, and a red van which had a foreign registration. Then there was the white pickup truck. This was seen parked midway between where Robert was last seen and his new BMX bike was found. According to a witness, the pickup truck was unoccupied, but its passenger door was open. This seemed out of place in Ballydedmond. Gardaí chased down these leads, appealing for drivers to come forward. But still nothing. Still that silence. As days wore on, patience wore thin and fear built. Robert's neighbour and close friend Wayne became irate with Gardaí when he felt they were wasting time on briefings, time that should be spent out looking, and when Gardaí paused the search due to bad weather, he insisted that the search must go on. As the search stretched on with no sign of Robert, the atmosphere in Midleton began to turn heavy with dread. It was as if Robert had disappeared off the face of the earth. For Mark and Majella Holohan, each passing hour was torture. In Majella's words, those days of uncertainty were a living hell. Still, the family clung to hope that somehow Robert might be found alive. That hope was shattered on the afternoon of Wednesday, January 12th, 8 days after Robert was last seen. Acting on new information, data from Robert's mobile phone that had been traced to a general area near Inch Strand, the search teams converged on a boggy, remote patch of land by the coast, about 12 miles from Ballydedmond. There, hidden in a ditch 40 feet deep, among thick bramble and gorse, a searcher spotted something chilling. They saw a small foot sticking out of the brush. In that moment, all of their worst fears were realised. They had found the body of Robert Holohan. To reach Robert, Gardaí had to be lowered down with a cherry picker. The child's body was wrapped in black bin bags and partially covered by debris. After 8 days exposed to the elements, the remains were difficult to identify at the scene, as wild animals had disturbed the site, adding another layer of horror to the discovery. That night, Garda Trevor Laffan was among the team of Gardaí sent to preserve the scene as they awaited the arrival of the state pathologist. These examinations are best carried out in daylight, not under the glare of torches, and so Garda Laffan and a colleague sat there with Robert through the night, watching him, minding him. Gardaí are trained for many things. Sitting beside the body of a dead child in the bitter winter night is not one of them. The night was so cold that frost set in on the jackets of the two Gardaí. Garda Laffan wanted to wrap the boy in a blanket to protect him from the cold, but he knew he couldn't. He and his colleague did what they could. They made sure Robert was never left alone for even a single moment that night. When Robert's body was at last returned to his family, it arrived in a small white coffin. The damage to his body was so bad, following the many days left in the wilderness, that the coffin was sealed. His parents and his siblings never got to see him, never got to hug him, never got to say goodbye. All they got was a lock of his hair. Robert Holohan would never come home. He would never be reunited with his family. He would never again see his loving brother and sister, or his adored pets. Robert's life had been stolen in an instant. The search for a missing boy was over. The pursuit of his killer was only just beginning. The confirmation that Robert Holohan had been the victim of foul play sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community in rural Cork. After over a week of uncertainty, the case had turned into a full murder inquiry. Gardaí shifted their focus from search and rescue to forensics and detective work. They were now racing to find whoever was responsible for Robert's death. Who was the well-dressed man? What happened in the white pickup truck? What happened to the white transit van with the red stripe? Was there a child killer in Cork? State pathologist Dr. Mary Cassidy performed a post-mortem examination on Robert's body the following day. The results guided the investigators. Dr. Cassidy concluded that Robert had died from asphyxia caused by compression of the neck. Apart from some bruising and minor abrasions, there were no other major injuries. It appeared that Robert had been choked to death. As Gardaí sought to establish a motive, they ruled out a sexual assault, as the autopsy found no evidence that any such assault had taken place. This detail, whilst a small relief amid the tragedy, helped dispel one of the darkest fears that had gripped everyone during the search. Robert's killer had not abused him in that way. A finding that pointed Gardaí towards motives rooted not in predatory behaviour or premeditation, but perhaps something else, anger or panic. As news spread of the awful discovery, a community fell into shock. Those closest to Robert were bereft. On the day Robert's body was found, his neighbour Wayne and Wayne's 19-year-old girlfriend, Rebecca Dennehy, had driven to the site at Inch Strand. Wayne brought a bouquet of flowers, placed them near the spot where Robert's body had been found, and said a prayer. Tears in his eyes. Clues from the dump site at Inch Strand also gave Gardaí insights into what had happened. Robert had been discovered fully clothed, wearing the same clothes he'd left home in on January 4th. But parts of his clothing, notably the back of his t-shirt and section of his bottoms and underwear, were charred and burned. Scattered beneath the body, technicians recovered burned sticks and remnants of melted plastic from the bin liner he was concealed in. It was apparent that someone had attempted, unsuccessfully, to set fire to the remains, or at least to destroy evidence. The damp winter conditions snuffed out the flames before the body itself was consumed by fire. For Gardaí, this detail was chilling. It suggested an effort by the killer to cover their tracks. Whoever had killed Robert hadn't acted in a blind frenzy and fled. They had taken time to try to hide what they'd done. Another crucial piece of evidence was Robert's mobile phone. Remarkably, the phone was recovered in one of the pockets of his clothing. A ping from the phone signal had helped lead the search team to the remote location. Gardaí were assisted by technical experts who were using an advanced tracking technology to analyse the last known signal pings from Robert's phone, a ping being every time the phone connected with a mobile phone tower. It was a relatively new investigative technique at the time. Those efforts helped to narrow down and triangulate a search area along the coastline, which is exactly where his body was ultimately found on Inch Strand. The phone itself would later undergo analysis. Investigators noticed something odd. The device had been wiped clean of fingerprints, even Robert's own, and certain data like some pictures had been deleted. This suggested to them that the killer may have handled the phone and attempted to remove any link between the device and themselves. In the days following the grim discovery, Gardaí publicly stated they were following several lines of inquiry. Early tips about the well-dressed stranger and vans and pickup truck were still being checked, but a clear picture was starting to emerge. What they did not reveal publicly at the time was that the location of the body had put one very firm thought in their minds. This isolated spot was not one an outsider would visit. Places like this were only known to people deeply familiar with the area. They now suspected the perpetrator was likely somebody local, and likely somebody Robert knew. Investigators theorised that the killing may not have been premeditated at all. It could have happened in the heat of the moment, an argument, a moment of madness, which caused the killer to panic and dispose of Robert's body. It meant the circle of suspicion turned inward, towards those who'd been close to the Holohan family in daily life. Gardaí began re-interviewing neighbours, friends, anyone who had seen Robert on January 4th. They quietly scrutinised the behaviours of those around the family during the search. Meanwhile, the Holohan family in the town of Midleton prepared to say goodbye to Robert. On January 15, 2005, thousands of mourners attended Robert's funeral at the Church of the Most Holy Rosary in Midleton. The little white coffin was carried into the church by Mark and Magella Holohan, surrounded by row after row of ashen, grief-stricken faces. The church was silent at times, but for the sound of sobbing. Some members of the media wept as they watched on. Canon Bertie Troy, who led the service, tried to strike a note of remembrance and celebration of Robert's short life. He noted, poignantly, that young Robert would have loved being the star of the show, if only under different circumstances. During the Mass, one of Robert's heroes, the great Cork hurler Sean O'Halping, read a prayer of the faithful. Robert had idolised the GAA star. O'Halping appealed for a society where children can enjoy the safety and security of being children. The funeral drew nationwide attention. The Taoiseach at the time, Bertie Ahern, sent a government minister as his representative, and the President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, also dispatched an aide-de-camp with a message of sympathy. The nation mourned with the Holahans. Their tragedy had touched on every parent's deepest fears. The Garda investigation continued to intensify. Forensic labs worked around the clock, processing DNA samples and other evidence from the crime scene. Publicly, the Gardaí remained tight-lipped, but there was a growing sense that a breakthrough was imminent. The DNA and fingerprint analysis, combined with their focus shifting closer to home, and the emerging timeline of Robert's last known movements, all seemed to be pointing in one direction. And that direction was not toward any mysterious, well-dressed stranger or passing van. It was back toward Ballydedmond, towards someone Robert knew well. Those suspicions were confirmed on the morning of January 16th, the day after Robert's funeral. That morning, not far from the Holohan family home, their neighbour Ray O'Donoghue sat in his bedroom. His son Wayne walked in. He told his father, "I love you. I'm sorry. It was an accident." He admitted he had killed Robert. Ray called his wife, Wayne's mother, Theresa. She arrived home and asked her son to please tell her it wasn't true. Ray called the Gardaí and invited them to their home, so Wayne could confess to what he had done. After 9 days of torture, and barely 24 hours after they had buried their son, Mark and Magella Holohan learned that the man confessing to Robert's killing was the nice young neighbour from next door, the very person who had stood with them through their vigil. the man who identified Robert's bike, the same person who told Magella all would be okay and even called Robert's phone, knowing that he would never pick it up, knowing he was already dead. Wayne O'Donoghue and his father had wanted to visit the Holohan home, to speak to the parents of Robert in person. Gardaí strongly advised against this. Wayne was taken into custody at the Midleton Garda station. In an initial statement to detectives, the 21-year-old engineering student broke down and said, "I'm a murderer. I'm sorry." He asserted that Robert's death had not been intentional, a claim that would be vigorously debated in the months to follow, one that Wayne would never deviate from. On January 18, 2005, Wayne O'Donoghue was formally charged with the murder of Robert Holohan. The community was stunned. The killer of Robert Holohan had been among them from the start, hiding in plain sight, helping the distraught family search for the very boy he had killed. It was a revelation almost too shocking to fathom, with even more disturbing details to come. Wayne O'Donoghue's confession answered the most pressing question: who had killed Robert Holohan? But it also created a host of new ones. How did it happen? Why did it happen? Why did he lie? Why inflict this missing person search on the family? Why go through the facade? And the most pressing question, would justice be served? As the case moved into the courts, the details behind Robert's final moments emerged in horrific detail. For Robert's family, hearing this would be a new kind of torture. But it was necessary, as they battled for justice for the killing of their little boy. Initially, when Wayne first confessed, the charge had been manslaughter, which in Ireland is the unlawful killing without intent to murder. But after consultation with the Director of Public Prosecutions, and in light of the evidence, the state decided to proceed with a murder charge prior to the trial. The trial was sent forward to the Central Criminal Court and a date was set for the end of that year. It would be just the second murder trial in County Cork in almost 80 years. In late November 2005, the case of the Irish State versus Wayne O'Donoghue opened in Courtroom 2 of the Washington Street Courthouse in Cork City. By now 21 years old, Wayne O'Donoghue pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter, essentially reiterating his claim that he had caused Robert's death unintentionally, an accident followed by panic. The Holohan family, determined to see justice done, attended every single day of the proceedings. They sat stoically through graphic evidence and harrowing testimony, listening to every detail about the killing of their son. According to Wayne O'Donoghue's statements to Gardaí, Robert's death was the result of a confrontation that spiraled disastrously out of control. Wayne told Gardaí that on January 4, 2005, shortly after Robert left his house, the 11-year-old had come to O'Donoghue's home looking for him. Wayne claimed Robert wanted him to take him out for a treat. Earlier that day, Wayne had casually mentioned the idea of a McDonald's milkshake, and Robert was eager to go. But when the time came, Wayne was busy. Traffic in town would be too bad, and he told Robert they couldn't go. This disappointed Robert. As Wayne walked with Robert outside near the driveway, Robert began tossing small stones in frustration, flicking pebbles at Wayne's Fiat Punto and at Wayne himself, frustrated that there would be no trip to McDonald's. Wayne told Gardaí he lost his temper. He shouted at Robert to stop throwing the stones, but he claimed Robert kept flicking small stones at the car. In a flash of anger, Wayne grabbed Robert to restrain him. He first put the boy in a sort of headlock from behind, then spun him around and placed his hand around Robert's throat, pushing him up against the car whilst shouting at him to stop. Moments later, when Wayne released his grip, Robert collapsed limp on the ground. Wayne says he stood over the body, calling his name, "Rob, Rob," but there was no response. Robert's eyes were closed. He wasn't moving or breathing. In a panic, Wayne claims he dragged the unconscious child into the family's home. No one else was there at the time. The O'Donoghue household was empty that afternoon. Wayne laid Robert on the bathroom floor and turned on the cold tap, splashing water on the boy's face in an attempt to revive him. He pressed his ear to Robert's mouth, hoping to hear a breath, but there was nothing. Wayne realised he had killed Robert. He later told Gardaí that shock and panic set in. He couldn't think clearly about what to do. Rather than call an ambulance or the Gardaí, he said he became irrational, frightened of the consequences. His actions would cause untold additional suffering to a family who had their son, brother, nephew, grandson ripped away and cruelly killed. He chose to say nothing. Wayne told Gardaí that he considered taking his own life, claiming he stood in front of the bathroom mirror, kitchen knife held to his throat, in disbelief at what he had done. He would later say that he didn't know why he didn't go through with the suicide, except that something came over him. Thoughts of his own family and girlfriend had stopped him. Instead, Wayne O'Donoghue made a decision based on self-preservation. He would try to cover up Robert's death. Wayne got 2 large Killeen black bin bags. He placed Robert's small body into the bags to conceal it. As evening fell, Wayne carried the wrapped body out to his car and put Robert's lifeless remains in the boot. He also picked up Robert's BMX bike, a distinctive silver bike, Robert's pride and joy, a gift just a few weeks prior from Santi. He loaded it into the car as well. Sometime after 8 p.m, under cover of darkness, Wayne drove out of Ballyedmond with the body of the boy in the boot of the Fiat Punto. Wayne headed roughly 20 kilometres east, driving towards the coast. As he drove, he panicked as a Garda patrol car drove behind him. Fearing he would be stopped for speeding and the Gardaí would discover the body of Robert in his car, he turned off along a quiet road near Inch Strand, an isolated beach area, and found a discreet spot by a hedgerow. There, in a ditch amid heavy brush, he dumped Robert's body and covered it with more foliage. Later, in his statement to the Gardaí, Wayne spoke of how he returned to the scene a second time. Using a can of petrol he had brought, Wayne then attempted to burn the evidence. He set fire to the bin bags and Robert's clothing, but the flames died out quickly, scorching only parts of the garments and charring sticks beneath. Happy that the body was at least hidden from a glancing view, Wayne fled the scene. On his way back, he pulled over about half a mile from Robert's home and dumped the BMX bike in some roadside bushes, perhaps hoping it would mislead searchers or delay the connection back to him. He then returned to Ballyedmond and rejoined normal life as if nothing had happened. In the hours that followed, Wayne O'Donoghue would console a worried mother, ring a missing child's phone, and help to rally a community to look for a boy he knew would never be found alive. The prosecution, led by senior counsel Shane Murphy, argued that Wayne's actions were not those of a panicked youth, but those of a cold killer who knew exactly what he was doing. Murphy emphasised the outcome of Wayne's chokehold. What is the natural and probable consequence of a 20-year-old man applying force to an 11-year-old boy's throat? He asked the jury pointedly. The state's case was that even if Wayne did not plan to kill Robert, he must have known that pressing on a small boy's neck could be fatal. They highlighted how methodically Wayne concealed his crime afterwards, cleaning fingerprints, dumping the body, feigning concern. In fact, during the 8 days before the body was found, the prosecution noted that Wayne had carried on everyday activities of looking at the television and walking the dog while the whole world around him was convulsed with the desire to find Robert. That behaviour, the state contended, showed an almost cold-blooded calculation inconsistent with mere panic. The defence, led by Blaise O'Carroll SC, did not dispute that Wayne caused Robert's death, but strongly denied that it was murder. They described the incident as one of the most extraordinary events, a sudden tragic lapse in character by an otherwise gentle young man. The defence stressed that Wayne had no previous history of violence and had immediately expressed remorse for what he'd done, albeit the so-called immediate remorse only came after his arrest and confession some 12 days after Robert disappeared. 12 days after the fact and the word immediate don't seem to fit together. Nevertheless, his defence team argued that Wayne's panic was genuine, that a terrified college student faced with an unimaginable accident might make stupid, terrible decisions out of fear, not malice. To bolster this, the defence pointed to Wayne's emotional breakdown and confession, just 24 hours after Robert's funeral, as evidence of his conscience. In short, They asked the jury to see Robert's death as a misfortune born of anger and recklessness, not an intentional killing.
Expert testimony played a key role. State pathologist Dr. Mary Cassidy and Dr. Jack Crane were called to give evidence. Crane was the chief state pathologist for Northern Ireland. He was called by the defence. They detailed the likely cause and manner of Robert's death. Dr. Cassidy told the court the marks to Robert's neck and mouth were consistent with manual strangulation. However, Dr. Crane said he believed Robert died for compression of the vagal nerve, which runs along the neck, which would be consistent with Wayne putting Robert in a headlock. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, no defensive wounds, no bruising on Robert's arms or indicative scratch marks on Wayne, which aligned with Wayne's account that the incident was brief and ended abruptly. Dr. Cassidy did note an injury inside Robert's mouth, which she believed could indicate a blow or a hand forcibly clamped over the boy's mouth during the altercation, perhaps to stop or stifle a scream. However, Dr. Crane interpreted the same injury as minor and not necessarily sinister. Justice Paul Kearney, who presided over the trial, later summarised that the injuries were at the horseplay end of the scale for a fatal outcome. This medical evidence lent some credence to the defence view that Robert's death might have been a freak occurrence rather than a vicious assault.
After 10 days of testimony and emotional witness statements, including heart-wrenching accounts from Robert's parents about the days he was missing, the case went to the jury. On December 9, 2005, the 7 women and 5 men of the jury returned their verdict. In a crowded, tension-filled courtroom, the registrar read their decision. Not guilty of murder. Guilty of manslaughter. Wayne O'Donoghue stood quietly in the dock as reality set in. He had been acquitted of the most serious charge, meaning the jurors did not believe he intended to kill Robert Holohan, but he would be held responsible for unlawfully taking the boy's life. There was no reaction from Wayne beyond a bowed head. In the public gallery, a collective exhale mingled with sobs, some of relief from Wayne's family, some of heartbroken frustration from Robert.
For the Holohan family, it confirmed the facts they knew. Wayne killed Robert, but not the judgment of malice they deeply felt was true. The nuance of intent was no comfort to parents who had lost their son. Sentencing was scheduled for January, and between the verdict and then, emotions ran high. Many in Ireland wondered, what penalty would a young man with no record receive for killing a child? The law allowed a wide range for manslaughter, from suspended sentences to life in prison. The Holahans braced themselves for what was to come. On January 24, 2006, the Central Criminal Court convened in Ennis, County Clare, to deliver the sentence. Justice Paul Kearney addressed the court, and specifically Mark and Magella Holohan, with a sober warning. I want to prepare you for the fact that the sentence I am going to impose is going to upset you. He then sentenced Wayne O'Donoghue to 4 years in prison for the manslaughter of Robert Holohan. He ordered that the term be backdated to January 16, 2005, when Wayne was first taken into custody, meaning Wayne had already served over a year of it. With standard remission for good behaviour, Wayne O'Donoghue would be eligible for release after about 3 years in early 2008. In practical terms, the young man who had killed Robert could be free by the time he was 23 years old. For a moment, the courtroom was silent, holding its collective breath. Then muffled gasps and cries arose from the Holohan supporters. No sentence would ever feel like enough for the loss of Robert, but 4 years felt painfully inadequate. Justice Kearney, aware of the public scrutiny, took time to explain the rationale. He emphasised that he was sentencing for manslaughter and not the cover-up that followed. The law did not allow him to treat it as a separate crime in this case, since the DPP had chosen not to file charges in relation to it, like impeding an investigation. He assured everyone that his decision was based solely on evidence given in open court. Evidence in court and nothing else, he said, an apparent reference to dispelling any rumours on inadmissible matters that had circulated outside the trial and would come to the fore when an explosive victim impact statement was read by Robert's mother. Justice Kearney acknowledged the Holohan family's pain, saying that Robert's life was so precious as to be incapable of measurement by any sentence. But he also noted legal principles. Sentencing is not about revenge, and it's not a direct measure of a life's value. The judge highlighted the medical testimony that the injuries inflicted were relatively minor. The choking had not broken any bones in Robert's neck. The bruises were not severe. In the judge's view, this supported Wayne's claim that the death occurred at the lower end of the violence spectrum, more akin to an accident during rough play than a brutal murder. This, he implied, merited a sentence far short of the maximum. Justice Carney condemned Wayne's subsequent actions in the strongest possible terms. He called the disposal of Robert's body and the week-long deceit appalling and inexcusable, saying it caused incredible grief and distress to the Holohan family and tied up the emergency services of the state for over a week. His actions exposed Robert's body to being mutilated by animals because it was left out in the wild. The judge bluntly stated that such a cover-up cannot be dismissed as being due to panic, because of the calculation involved. He reiterated that he was not punishing Wayne separately for the cover-up, only taking it into account as an aggravating factor within the manslaughter sentencing range. Balancing all factors, the act, the aftermath, the remorse, and the need for rehabilitation, he arrived at a sentence of 4 years. For many, this was an incomprehensibly short span for a child's life. "You're a disgrace, boy," shouted Mark Holohan, Robert's father, to Wayne O'Donoghue, while his mother Magella said the family would be appealing the sentence. Magella Holohan finally had the chance to directly address the man who had killed her son. She delivered a victim impact statement that gripped the courtroom for 20 minutes. Speaking through tears but with complete composure, she described the nightmarish days when Robert was missing, how she and Mark endured horrendous thoughts while trying to remain strong for their younger children. Those days were a living hell, she said, made worse by the cruel swirl of gossip. At one point, unfounded rumours even cast suspicion on the Holohans themselves in their own son's disappearance. Magella's voice shook as she painted a picture of Robert's personality, his kindness and generosity. Before the watching world, she paid a stirring and heartbreaking tribute to her little boy. Then Magella turned to face Wayne O'Donoghue. The neighbour she had trusted with her child was now convicted of an act of cruelty that almost destroyed the family. "I trusted Wayne completely," she said, before blasting the barefaced, cunning and devious lies he told for over a week. She told him she will never forgive him for the needless torment he caused by hiding Robert's body. If only, she lamented, he had made an anonymous phone call the very first night telling someone where Robert was. Then she said all this could have been avoided. Instead, his deceit prolonged their agony for 8 unbearable days. As Magella detailed the nightmares that still haunt her, people in the courtroom held their breath. Beyond paying tribute to the child taken from her, Magella Holohan raised a series of unanswered questions she was left with after the conclusion of it all. Questions about phone calls in the night from Wayne to Robert's phone, about why there were no fingerprints found on Robert's phone, and questions about inconsistencies in Wayne's story of how long it took him to drive from his home to Inch Strand as he brought Robert's body there. There were 8 of these unanswered questions. Some had come before the court, like where Robert had been in the hour between when he was last seen and when Wayne claimed to have encountered him that afternoon. For that and some others, there was no answer found. She questioned things for which there had been an accepted answer in court, but which she could not comprehend, like why the Garda forensics team had found no stone marks or damage on Wayne's car, despite his claims Robert throwing stones at the car had been the catalyst for it all. For all these issues, it was up to the jury to consider them, to give what weight they would to the evidence available, even if it felt incomplete. With some of Magella's questions, particularly regarding DNA evidence, they arose from matters the court had decided not to admit to the case, as there was inconclusive evidence, and the judge felt they could serve to confuse matters and perhaps unfairly prejudice the jury. Her mention of them, against the court's wishes, caused shock in the courtroom and controversy that lasted well beyond that day. But she spoke with determination, bravery, and a mother's love. The DNA evidence was semen found on Robert's hand. Following 2 tests that had contradicting results, experts decided the trace of semen on Robert's hand might have been secondarily transferred from the mat in the O'Donoghue bathroom, which would be consistent with Wayne O'Donoghue's own admission that he had placed Robert on it while trying to revive him. Because contamination of the sample could not be ruled out, the Director of Public Prosecutions decided the results were too uncertain to place before a jury, and the evidence was withdrawn entirely. When Magella raised it in her statement, It was the first time the public had heard of it. With all of these questions, those half answered, those not asked, they left more torturous unknowns for the Holohan family. More frustration, more pain, and a deep sense that they had not got the justice they were owed. Majella powerfully listed them all off and asked why, still, did they not know the full picture, even after all this time. Each question hung in the air. Everyone in the courtroom felt the pain in her words. Wayne O'Donoghue didn't have the courage to lift his head to meet Majella's stare as she spoke. His mother wept silently beside him, while his father Ray stared straight ahead, stoic and pale. Through heart-wrenching sobs, Majella posed what might be the most agonizing few questions that will likely haunt her forever. Did he scream? If so, why didn't I hear him? The killing of Robert Holohan shook the country. It tore at the sense of safety that rural families held dear, and it revealed a devastating truth. Sometimes the danger is not the stranger in the shadows, but the person you think you know so well. In a sense, it was a shock to the core ideas we have about community and about trust. And yet in the days he was missing, before anyone knew what had happened, thousands of people poured into East Cork to look for Robert. Neighbours, strangers, schoolmates, soldiers, Gardaí. A community rose to help. They trudged through fields, farms and riversides in the January cold because a young boy was missing, and helping to bring him home was all that mattered. Majella Holohan concluded her statement by saying, "Whatever happens here today, even if we move house or leave the country, there is no place to go, no place to hide from this nightmare. It is there every minute of every hour of every day." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lines of Inquiry. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review, sharing it on social media or telling a friend. Make sure to follow the show in your podcast app. Your support helps us to keep exploring these important cases. Lines of Inquiry is a GoLoud original podcast presented by me, John Sweetman. The podcast is created by Darren Cleary. Our executive producer is Eoin Brennan, and Siobhan Walsh is our producer. Sound editing and design are by Neil Kavanagh. This episode was written by Darren Cleary, edited by Eoin Brennan and myself, John Sweetman. In the end, everything done in the dark comes to light. In the next episode of Lines of Inquiry, the brutal and senseless murder of Marie Dillon, an elderly widow living alone in Dublin City's northern suburbs. A crime seemingly without motive and equally lacking in any viable suspects.